Stephen, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit more about your own background? Where did you grow up?
I grew up largely in Durban. I was born in Johannesburg, but I left when I was 4 years old. So I spent my schooling in Westville and in Durban, and then I went to Stellenbosch University. Then I came back and went and did my articles at Ernst & Young, and I spent a bit of time overseas and largely in the UK, but travelling a bit and working a bit. And then I came back and I started working with Deutsche Bank.
Right.
I started in the project finance department. I then moved into M&A, but I didn't enjoy that. It was like watching paint dry. And then I got into the whole structured equity around the BEE and the equity capital markets, which I really enjoyed. And I ended up there being on the Exco, being the managing director for the global banking business.
Yeah.
After 10 years, I got asked by Barclays to come and join them when they bought out the controlling interest in ABSA, and they wanted to set up an investment bank, and they asked me to come and set up the private side of that business. After 3 years, I became the CEO, and we turned it into a corporate investment bank, and then corporate investment banking and wealth management.
Yeah.
And so I was CEO there for 7 years. So I'm a chartered accountant by training. I did computer science, maths and economics at university. But in those days you had to be a chartered accountant if you wanted to get a good job in South Africa. So that's the background. I'm married with, I've got 6 children from two marriages. So we've got his, hers and ours.
Right.
3 girls and 3 boys, so we're the very average couple.
Okay.
I've got 2 dogs and live in Bryanston. So.
And tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
It's interesting. If I could have it all again and I could choose to be anything, I'd probably be a Formula One driver.
Oh, which team do you support?
I support Hamilton, and I supported Raikkonen until he's still there, but I still like him. But Hamilton's been my guy for probably the last 7 or 8 years.
So why Formula One?
I don't know, I just find it very technical. It's very interesting. I mean, a lot of people think it's quite boring because it just goes round and round a track, but if you actually get into the technicalities of what they can do, what they can't do, what they do every year to try and make it competitive, you understand it's actually a fascinating business. In fact, I mean, a lot of it is actually just a big data business. They take a lot of data, they crunch it, and they make some decisions out of it. So it's very fourth industrial revolution-ish, so I find it fascinating, just the different things that have happened and how they change technology and make a few adjustments that make such a big difference. So it's quite an interesting watch.
So how much comes down to data, how much comes down to the car, and how much comes down to the human factor?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Listen, it all depends, but you can be a very good driver if you have a very good car and team, but that doesn't mean you'll be the world champion. I mean, we saw Hamilton last year win the world championship not with the best car. He just made the least mistakes during the year. And so at the moment there's a number of drivers driving Formula One that could be in the top 3 if they had the right car. There's a number of them who could be the top 1 if they had the right car. But I think people underestimate how important the driver is in making the car work. Not just driving, but understanding brakes, understanding tires, understanding suspension, understanding downforce, and how his driving style with those things on this track are important. So the whole car setup is quite different. Hamilton's got very good at it over time. Schumacher was incredibly good at it, and eventually made him a very good driver. But there's been some good drivers who haven't really managed to get it right, and so haven't done the real exponential stuff.
Now, many of the dynamics in sports success obviously relate to business. Are there any lessons we can learn from Formula One?
Yeah, Formula One is all about teamwork, I think. If you have a look at how many people are operating, yes, at the end of the day, the driver's got out there and go and perform. But teamwork around a tire change, teamwork around preparing a car, teamwork around interpreting data. And I think that's probably the most amazing thing. Imagine being able to change a tire in 2 seconds. I mean, that's like pretty hectic. And all four of them, all in unison, all synced up, all working together.
So, Stephen, can you tell us who inspired you in your early days and maybe later on throughout your career?
It's an interesting thought. I mean, I was very into athletics as a youngster, and I was a big fan of Sebastian Coe. Read all his books and followed him, doing all his races and Olympics. But really, I suppose when I look back, what was driving me, I don't know. I'm very much someone who just likes to have a problem to solve. If I haven't got a problem to solve, I can actually be a little bit lazy, I like to have pressure, I like to have problems, I like to do stuff. My wife's very worried that one day I'm going to retire and then I'm going to sit at home and drive her crazy, because she just knows that, even at home I don't sit still. I'm always doing something, fixing this, doing that, playing with the dogs. I don't just sit, very seldom just sit and do nothing. But I don't know, there's been sort of various things. I've always had this philosophy of learn, earn, return, so in the beginning of life you're learning, so listen a lot. Then you'll earn in the last maybe 10 years, and then at some point you've got to give back. And it's in that giving back that I think the leadership stuff really comes out, because it's not about you anymore, it's about the people that are working for you and how you almost creating a career for them. So that's always been a big ambition. I spent a lot of time in my last 2 jobs at the World Economic Forum looking at financial inclusion, seeing how you can get social equality. That's been fascinating for me. I think I've learned a lot out of that, more than just from work. And so those are the things that I think have shaped the way you think. But as I say, life's a journey, not a destination. You learn stuff every day. When you stop learning, you should stop working. It's as simple as that.
Now, looking back over your career, would you say there was a major, or maybe a couple of major turning points where you took a decision to go this way and could have gone the other way?
There's a few. I mean, quite a funny one that I'm in IT at the moment is that I was looking to get a bursary from IBM when I was a youngster going to varsity, and in those days, IBM ruled the world, and they had a big office in Smith Street in Durban, and I went to the office and I walked around, and my conclusion from that was there was no future in computers, and therefore I didn't want to do it, because I was just going to be general management. And obviously we know that the truth about how much computers have affected the world. But that was a long time ago. I mean, I was the first set of intake at the University of Stellenbosch who actually used the old Magenta 364 PC. Before that you had to use punch cards, so we're going back a long time.
You're talking about the green characters on the screen.
Yeah. So that was a turning point for me, because I realized that in South Africa at that time, if I wasn't a CA, I was going to really, it was going to be difficult. So even though I hated accounting, I decided to become a CA. And that was a big changing point, and it turned out to be quite important, because it got me quite a few jobs without too much effort when I was a youngster, and that was quite important. And today it's still seen as a good qualification. And I had stopped accounting in grade 9 because I just hated it. But I ended up becoming a chartered accountant. So even after my degree, my honours in management accounting at Stellenbosch, I went on and added and became a CA. So that was one big career decision. The second one was I got offered a job by an American company when I came back to South Africa after travelling, and I wouldn't want, it was in IT as well, and I went to accept the job, and the manager was the guy who was running it was from offshore, and I thought he was underpaying me slightly, and I sort of mentioned to him that I think it should be slightly more, and he said to me, it's a privilege to work for this company, take it or leave it. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to leave it. And I said to him there in the meeting, actually, thanks very much, but I'm going to leave it. And I walked out, and he followed me out, and what do you mean you don't want to work for me? So I said, well, I don't feel comfortable. And I then, instead of getting into IT, I got into banking. The next day I got a phone call from Deutsche Bank, and they interviewed, I had like 10 interviews in 4 days, and they offered me a job. And I didn't even know what it was, what really investment banking was about. It was a bit like that Secret Service joke. Can you keep a secret? Yes, you're in Secret Service. They said to me, do you know what project finance is? And I said, I think it's raising finance for big projects. And they said yes. And I got the job anyway. And that was the first 10 years of my career. And that was very game changing. I actually had a very good boss there who's still quite involved here in South Africa, and he made a big difference to me. He taught me quite a few things that have been very helpful, around being precise, being pedantic, writing stuff down, listening, not talking, don't rush decisions, especially big ones. And he also, when after I'd been there a while, he started stepping aside and giving me some of his clients to go and so that I could grow. And that, I suppose, at the end of the day was why when Barclays came, bought ABSA, they asked me to come and help them, because I'd obviously built some kind of reputation. And then I ended up becoming the CEO. It was never an ambition to become a CEO, funny enough, but when I got offered the job, it seemed like a bucket list thing there that would really push my boundaries, and it did. I totally underestimated what it would be like. But once I'd retreaded myself in terms of being able to do public speaking, manage people better, understand them, it was something I never wanted to do. I just wanted to do the spreadsheets and do the deals and build models and everything. That was easy because it was all just mathematical. I mean, as an aside, I always say to people, if you don't understand what I'm saying, I understand, because my first language isn't English, it's maths. So if you draw me pictures and graphs, I understand better than actual words. And so it was quite difficult getting into a situation where you with people the whole time. You're dealing with issues, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with customers. But that was a good challenge for me. And then towards the end of it, I realized that I was actually becoming almost redundant with my staff, because these youngsters had access to social media, to Google, to LinkedIn. Suddenly just your age and your didn't count for a lot, so knowledge wasn't such a big factor anymore. It was intelligence. What did you do with the knowledge? And these kids had tons and tons of knowledge at their fingertips, and so I realized I needed to really re-educate myself. And I started reading books around exponential leadership, around exponential businesses, around the platform economy, around how Google works, and just started getting myself into today again, because I'd obviously been a bit lax about that. And that was a fascinating experience. And the thing that came out most for me was a few things. One was that the world is changing so fast. If you have an incremental attitude to your strategy, by the time you've implemented it, it's already out of date. And Deloitte have this great thing. They have this thing called the center for the edge, and they have this thing that they call the zoom out, zoom in. So go and understand where you think your competitors, your market, and your customers are going to be in 10 years' time. Go and understand that. So shoot forward 10 years. Have a look at all the changes in technology you're anticipating, and then understand your world in 10 years' time. And then set your strategy now on a path to get there. Because if you don't, you're not going to get there.
So you have to go back into the future.
That's right. Learn from the future, not from the past. And it's exactly what we weren't taught at varsity, at college. So you instead of doing these, okay, last year my budget was this, let's just add 10% and make a few changes and let's go for that. That's a dying strategy because people will disrupt you, people will use technology to, get underneath you. And that was a big wake-up call for me because I realized that I was actually becoming a dinosaur by just doing this incremental thinking. So that was the first thing. The second thing that came out of it is I realized that my youngsters were actually a lot cleverer and a lot more capable because of their access to information. And they wanted to do more things than just having this job description. And actually, a job description for a youngster is like a straitjacket. And if you really want to get the best out of your youngsters, you need to give them space and give them authority and give them ability, but give them accountability. And the thing that I realized was the most irritating for me when I joined was that as the CEO, is the business wasn't fit for me to run it the way I wanted to run it. I needed to first change it. And so one of the concepts that we came up with was, let's build the business that the future leaders want to run. So the minute they become the boss, it's ready for them to run. And so we started engaging the youngsters on what kind of business did they want to work for, what kind of business did they want to run eventually. So how did we have to shape ourselves today to get there so that when they become the leaders in 10 years time or whatever it is, it's ready for them, it's fit for purpose. And that was a very interesting experience. I remember the one youngster having a chat to me and saying, he Googled me and he sees I've got some interest in Egyptology and everything. I said, yeah, I love the maths of it and everything. I don't know if you know, but it's very mathematical. I think the height of the pyramid is exactly divisible between the distance between the moon and the Earth. Yeah, exactly, no decimals. It's divisible. The pyramid is perfect in size, and its edges. They actually measure perfectly.
So is it possible they were more advanced in technology than we are today?
Possibly. I mean, with what tools they had at the thing. Anyway, the story was, so I said yes. He said, have you seen the pyramids? I said yes, I've actually been there. He says, do you know they're one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world? So I said yes. I said it's fascinating. He says, so why do you use it as your management structure? And this was coming from a youngster, and suddenly you realize that they're looking for something different, and actually this whole pyramid structure that we've built over time is just not fit for purpose. And so we came up with an idea that actually if you want to give people flexibility to not be straitjacketed by their job, that they can actually explore and use some of their intellect, get involved in other projects, move around the business, we'd need to have a very different management structure. And so we went for something that was what I call more a mentorship program, because this idea that you have this team and they only work for you is finished. So, people want to do exciting pieces of work, and they're going to, there'll be a team leader there for that piece of job. You might be the HR specialist, but you're part of that project. So this idea that you've got these pure verticals doesn't work anymore. You have to create almost a matrix structure where you know what projects you have to do, and then you get the different skills from the different parts of the business, and they run a project together, and they own that project, and they must get performance managed on that project. The second thing that was interesting was that we had a biannual, twice a year, performance management. And I felt that everyone, they were so busy, so what they did is they'd performance manage you based on the last few weeks, because that's all they could remember. And also, if you think about it, it's like someone sends you a Instagram or a Facebook page or something, and 6 months later you go like. Imagine if you did that to your kids. 6 months later you acknowledge that they actually did work. It's not how the youngsters work today. And so we had to come up with a system where every time you did a project, there was continual feedback on how you're doing. Is it working? Is it not? That's how people want to be managed. That it's not suddenly this big discussion twice a year and that sort of counts for everything. And if you haven't worked it out into, a big storybook, you sort of, doesn't work. So those were quite interesting changes, and we ended up getting a lot of productivity out of people. It was very interesting, and I think that's what the two things that I think people don't understand in the new world is the youngsters are very different when we were youngsters, so you're going to need to manage them differently and you need to treat them differently if you want to get 100% effort out of them. In fact, in some cases you get 110. And the second thing is you really need to understand who your competitors of the future are, not of today, because they change. And if you don't know your competitors of the future, that's when your business is no longer future-proof. And so you need to do some work around that because it's not something you know. You've got to go and find it out. And it's not something that you would have just, because you've been in the business for 10 years, you instinctively know. And so that was quite a big wake-up call for me in terms of having to almost re-educate myself to be relevant for, to build the business that the youngsters want to manage in a few years' time.
So, Stephen, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Well, I think, leadership in a capitalistic world, I think has broken down quite a bit because, my feeling is too many people climb a ladder just to get to the top, to get the paycheck, to move on. And actually, when you get there, you've got a massive responsibility for a lot of people's lives, livelihoods, careers, futures. And actually, when you get to the top, you need to start looking down and pulling people up. And so I find too often is that leadership aren't really pushing the boundaries for the future. They aren't really trying to make decisions that will change the future. They're just trying to keep a happy medium. And in a world where technology is fundamentally changing so fast, you really need to sometimes, put it out there. And the best way to put it out there is to allow your staff, doesn't matter what level they are, to be very critical of what you're doing. And that's the best way to be able to make these decisions and do things. So in fact, you become an enabler for the business rather than, okay, everyone must do what I want to do. And it's a totally different way, To be a leader, you need lots of followers, and the only way you get followers today is if you're doing what they want you to do rather than what you want to do.
And what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
Is really listening, and also, but listening not from the hierarchy, listening from the vertical stripe. So you need to speak to the people who have just come in the business and the people that are senior in the business. You need to spend time with everyone to really get a feel for what's going on, what's important, and how you get the best efficiency out of the business. Otherwise, people tend to, this saying, people leave managers, not businesses, is just so true. It's not about you, it's about how you're enabling people. And the more you enable people, the better you actually do and at the end of the day. So you have to find a way to do less, but to enable people and try and be the arbiter around it rather than actually having too many fixed ideas yourself.
So when you speak to aspiring leaders and maybe even your own children, what is it you tell them they should focus on for future-proofing their own career?
The most important thing today is to be creative. Think differently. Don't think. You need to look at problems and solve problems very differently. There's that great Einstein saying about you can't solve tomorrow's problems with today's thinking. You can't solve the problem. You can't solve problems with the thinking that created them. You've got to use different thinking. And in today's world, I think that is more and more true. So you don't need to learn facts. You need to learn how to use facts. You need to, how do you get all this together and think about it differently? So I always try and get them to be creative, not just follow the crowd. Think differently, try different things, ask people about different things, challenge things. Don't just accept things. You don't have to in today's world. There's enough information out there for you to really challenge the status quo. And in that way, you get far more comfortable about your decisions than if you haven't done that.
And when it comes to technology, Stephen, what are the tools of technology or the technologies that future leaders should learn and master?
You know, it's interesting. I think we're going to get to a position where, actually coding things is going to be quite important. It's almost like, when computers came out, you had to learn to type. I still type with 2 or 3 fingers, whereas, my kids type properly. It's just normal for them. And I think we're going to get to the next thing, where is actually software is going to be, with microservices and that, there's going to be an absolute ability to create your own mini programs to make your life easier. You're not going to rely on other people to do it. And if you haven't learnt that creative skill and the ability to program, it's going to be very, very difficult. I'm not talking heavy program, I'm talking light program. It's almost, if you remember when there was that Lotus 123 and they came out with macros. I mean, suddenly the spreadsheeting world went berserk, because suddenly you could do so much more. And I think we're heading into that world where even things like Java and Python or that are becoming easier and easier to master, and I think it's going to become a core skill.
And when it comes to social media, Stephen, what is it you tell future leaders? How should they go about building their own brand on social media?
Yeah, listen, I still think social media has got quite a lot of maturing to do. A lot of people use it for the wrong things. And so, we have fake news issues. People shout their mouths off too quickly. It's very easy to have an opinion when you're not sitting face to face. And so I really think that people need to think about social media as if they were having a conversation with someone, because once it's on there, it's there for the rest of your life. If you put it on now, people will pick it up when you're 60. And so you need to be responsible how you use it. It's a great medium. I think you learn a lot, you get a lot of contact, you get a lot of feedback if you're being sensible about it. And so I always say to people, just remember that once it's out there, it can never be brought back. This isn't like a conversation that people can forget about. It's a conversation that never gets forgotten about. And so be responsible about it, think about it, because if you don't, you can do a lot of damage to yourself and other people without being able to really recover from it. So I always say to them, think about what you put on social media.
Now, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
Listen, I've mentored quite a few people. I mean, and really what I've tried to do with people is to get them to think broadly about their situation. I know, one chap, had the opportunity to get into BE deals when he was a youngster because he was a CEO, and he didn't. And today he's a managing director of one of the at one of the banks, doing very well liked, and he's still got his whole career ahead of him. I think if he had gone into that world, he would have had a very limited experience. He spent some time in overseas with the business, and so I've tried to keep people sensible. I always use the analogy that Brian Joffrey only started Bidvest late in life. He didn't start it as a youngster. EOH was started by Asher only when he was in his I think late 50s. So don't rush the goalie. Learn stuff when there's always a time for everything. And so when I mentor people, I try and tell them to do things when they're ready for it, not just because there's an opportunity. If you don't think it's the right thing for you, then don't do it, because when you're young in your career, you can very, very quickly destroy your confidence. So don't rush it. You've got it's a journey. and actually you'll make more money in your last 10 years than you will in the first 30 years. So just do it for the right reasons. And so that's really what I do around mentoring. And then I try and help people with just life decisions, you know. I've saved one or two people from getting divorced because it's not a very nice thing, and just talking them through my experience, and you know, that's helped them to go back, rethink it, look at it in different ways, understand what they should be doing rather than what they think they should be doing. You don't always succeed, but I've had 2 successes there, so that's helpful.
And are there any role models of leadership that you suggest future leaders should learn from?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's all about your personality, who you are, and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think everyone should have a style that suits them. But as I said earlier, it's about being inclusive. It's about making sure the people working for you are allowed to have a say in the business. And I think as a leader today, it's about being a mentor and about listening. So no, I think you must make up your own style, and you must learn your own lessons, and you'll take a bit from, you know, many people. So I don't think anyone's been the perfect leader. And I think businesses need different leaders at different times. You know, sometimes you need a restructuring person who's not always the visionary, you know. Sometimes you need a culture changing person who's not always the restructuring person. So I think the one thing for me that has been quite satisfying is I've left positions even though I didn't need to. You know, once I'd been there long enough and I built my team up and I could see I was being the glass ceiling, I've moved on, and that's been very rewarding, because when I look back, I've tended to move at the right time. I haven't overstayed my welcome. I haven't, you know, because you tend to then believe your own BS. And I've always had this thing in mind that I'm not going to do anything for too long. And if you have a look, I've had 2 10-year careers, you know, in 2 of the banks, and both of them I got to a level where I needed to move up or move out. And if I didn't want to move up, I must move out. And I've criticized people for not doing it, so I sort of, you know, ate my own, took my own medicine and actually, you know, did it. And looking back, those have been very good decisions for me.
So Stephen, how can people connect with you, and where should they follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I don't do a lot of posting on social media. I do bits and pieces, but I do respond to LinkedIn. I use that more as my business stuff. My Facebook stuff I keep just for friends and family. I only put personal stuff on there. It's like holiday photos and things. I don't do business on that. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, but I don't use it a lot. I find it quite cumbersome for me. I do read it every now and again, but less and less. But on LinkedIn, I do respond to people who message, and, you know, get in. I've got quite a few links on that.
Right.
So.
And Stephen, last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life?
Yeah, the most important thing is be honest at all times, even to yourself, most importantly. It's too easy to try and convince yourself things aren't as they are. If you can be honest with your situation and what you're doing and what's going on, it's much easier to make decisions. As soon as you try and cloud it, it becomes very, very difficult. And I think, you know, just going back to my point about having moved on, I always set myself these targets and said, if I get there, I must go. And every time I didn't hang around. I didn't try and, you know, push the envelope because it suited me. I just knew that the best thing for me was to move on. So just move on, and we'll solve it afterwards. But you've got to be honest to yourself about that. Otherwise, you make bad decisions.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom and your passion for social impact, and I think social equality, and helping us to build a better future. Thank you.
man.